exactly what you want and you're doing all the work and you're still not following through on your goals, the reason might be a lot more practical than you think. So your manifestations may have a bottleneck, and it's probably hiding in one of three places: your time, your energy, or your money. So ask yourself, where is my time going? And where is my energy going? And where is my money going? Because you can say that you want something all day long, but if your actual resources keep flowing somewhere else, your life is getting completely different instructions. And this is where your manifestations get real, because your intention might show you where you want to go, but your daily choices are what actually move you there. And your time, energy, and money often show you what you're actually building. So if you've been trying to create a bigger life and you keep wondering, why am I not following through? I want to show you how to find the bottleneck instead of automatically assuming that you need to try harder. And sometimes we make being stuck way more complicated than it needs to be. And there might actually be a very practical reason you're not moving forward. Like, we may think, maybe I'm lazy, maybe I'm inconsistent, I'm sabotaging myself, I just don't want it badly enough. When sometimes there is a very identifiable bottleneck sitting right in front of us. And you might have plenty of time, but very little usable energy, or plenty of energy, but your time is scattered across 20 different priorities. And you might have time and energy, but the next step requires money that you haven't intentionally allocated. So you keep stopping right before that step. And sometimes you technically have all three, but they're leaking into things that have very little to do with the life that you keep saying you want. And that doesn't mean you need to become some hyper disciplined robot who tracks every minute and hyper vigilant about every dollar that you spend. It just means that you want your resources to start becoming evidence of your intention. And this is something I call the TEM framework, which is about your time, energy, and money. And the basic idea is that one of these three resources is often the hidden bottleneck limiting everything else. So time is how intentionally you're directing your life towards the reality that you want. Energy is the quality of your internal state and your capacity to create. And money is how you manage and direct your finances towards the reality that you're trying to create. And what I love about looking at manifestation this way is that it makes something that can feel very abstract become very tangible. So instead of only asking, do I believe this manifestation is possible? I can also ask, okay, but does my calendar reflect it? Does my energy sustain it? Does my bank account support it? Not because every dollar and every minute needs to be optimized, but because eventually your inner intention has to become an outer decision. And manifestation isn't just imagining the destination, it's repeatedly allocating resources towards it. And the surprising part is that more isn't automatically better, because you can have a lot of a certain resource and still have a bottleneck around it. For example, you could have plenty of money, but almost no energy. So technically you can afford the opportunities you want, but you're too exhausted to enjoy or even pursue them. You can have tons of energy and ideas, but poor time management. So you're constantly starting things and wondering why nothing gets finished. Or you could have lots of available time, but so much fear around spending money that you refuse to invest in the thing that would actually move you forward. And that's why I don't think the question is simply, how do I get more time, energy, and money? The better question is, how am I currently using the time, energy, and money I already have? Because when you find the biggest limiting factor and shift it, when you start shifting it, suddenly the other pieces can start moving too. And this is where accountability becomes really important, because accountability isn't punishing yourself for not doing enough. To me, accountability is being willing to look at the evidence of your choices without blame and shame, and just as information so you can see from a bird's eye view. So, for example, if you say like writing your book is your biggest goal, but you spend 20 hours a week doing low priority tasks and 0 hours writing, or even just a couple of hours writing, right? If you say you desperately want to grow your business, but every time you sit down to work, you're so emotionally depleted that you can't think clearly, that's just information too. So another example is like if you say you want more financial freedom, but money comes in and immediately leaves without you consciously deciding where it's going, this is just more information. And you're just analyzing your current reality. Your job is not to shame yourself for any of it. Your job is to get curious enough to find out what your current reality is actually showing you. And that's when you can stop throwing solutions at the wrong problem. So let's say somebody wants to start a business while they're still working a full-time job, and every Sunday they say, this is the week I'm finally going to work on it, we're going to start work on it. And then the week comes. So let's just say Monday comes and they're answering messages, doing errands, helping everyone else, staying late at work, cleaning the house, researching business ideas. And then like suddenly it's Friday again. So they decide their problem is time and create the most beautiful color-coded schedule you have ever seen, except now they're spending even more time planning how they're eventually going to use their time. But when you look closer, maybe time isn't actually the biggest bottleneck, because there are several available hours in their week. Their bigger issue might be energy. Like by the time they reach those hours, they're completely depleted from overcommitting, people pleasing, worrying, and running on pressure all day. So the manifestation isn't necessarily asking them to squeeze another task into Tuesday night. It may be asking them to protect their energy, create a boundary, and make sure your biggest priorities aren't getting the leftovers of your energy. Or let's flip that around and imagine somebody who has plenty of energy and genuinely loves what they're creating, but money is their bottleneck. Maybe they want to launch a photography business and they've been talking about it for 2 years, but they keep refusing to spend money on the equipment, the website, training, or support they've already decided that they need. But on the other hand, they're spending money in 20 smaller places without really noticing, because those decisions don't activate the same fear as investing in themselves. So they're not necessarily irresponsible with money. They may actually be extremely careful with it. But careful and intentional aren't always the same thing, because you could protect a resource so aggressively that you prevent it from supporting the life that you want. So now their accountability question becomes, what is my money currently supporting? And does that match what I keep saying matters to me? And now suddenly we're not talking about whether the universe heard their manifestation. We're looking at whether their resources have somewhere intentional to go. And sometimes the problem could be a mix of time and energy. So for example, somebody thinks they're making progress because they are constantly moving. They're listening to podcasts, making spreadsheets, reading books, researching, taking the classes, reorganizing the workshop, and telling everybody about the big thing that they're about to do. And that can feel productive because there's a lot of activity, but activity and movement towards the destination aren't always the same thing. Like, unless you have movement towards the destination. So you may have speed, which is activity, but lack velocity. And what I mean by this is speed gives you movement, while velocity means your movement has direction and is closing the gap between where you are and where you want to be. So the question becomes, did all of this activity actually change my position? Because accountability isn't asking how busy you are, it's asking whether the things you did move the manifestation into the direction where you are going. And I had to learn this with time because I used to think that if something mattered to me, giving myself more time to do it would obviously help me do it better. But what I've actually noticed about myself is almost the opposite. When I give myself a smaller, concentrated work window, I tend to focus better and follow through better. So, for example, instead of filming YouTube and Instagram reels and coaching and planning content and everything else to expand across my entire life, I've been experimenting with giving work clearer boundaries. And the interesting thing is, when I decrease the amount of time I'm giving myself to work, I don't necessarily accomplish less. Sometimes I accomplish more because there isn't this giant open-ended day where I can keep circling the task and doing overthinking or whatnot, right? Like, then I have room for social dancing and friends and nature and social activities and experiences that make me feel like I'm actually living my life. So my time management has become less about how much can I fit into today and more about what actually deserves my focused time and what do I want my life to have room for. Also, energy has been another huge one for me because there have been periods of my life where my response to feeling behind or overwhelmed was basically to become even more like intense. And I would prepare more and organize more and learn more and push harder and figure everything out. And I thought that somewhere inside all of that effort, I would finally feel caught up. But eventually I started realizing that pressure can create movement while simultaneously draining the very energy I need to sustain that movement. And I've seen the opposite happen in my life too. So when I make room for like social dancing and friendships and nature and play and beautiful experiences, that things I genuinely look forward to, I'm not necessarily taking energy away from my goals. A lot of those experiences actually give me energy back. And then I come to my work with more of myself available. And that has been a big shift for me because rest and pleasure used to be much more easier to categorize as the thing that you earn after the important work is finished. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't, that sometimes you do need to have that afterwards. Like, it's not all about rest and pleasure first. Sometimes you need to really gauge and discern what you need at that moment. But for me personally, it was a lot of hustle and bustle. So I would just, once I finished a task, I would be like, okay, like what can I do now for tomorrow? So it's going to help me for tomorrow. And I would just be constantly working. But now I'm learning that managing my energy means knowing what drains me and what restores me and what deserves access to me in the first place. And with money, one of the most helpful things I've done is create different buckets so my money actually has a destination. So for example, this much goes towards necessities. This much goes towards like food, or this much can support savings, and this can support travel or something pleasurable and that I enjoy. So I love doing this, and it feels so much more efficient that instead of money coming in and me vaguely hoping I'm making the right decisions with it, what mattered to me was not creating a financial system where every enjoyable purchase suddenly becomes evidence that I had failed at being responsible. Like, I wanted structure and enjoyment, because if I'm putting money aside for travel or something fun, then when I use that money, I want to actually enjoy what I intentionally created it for. And this also lets me notice the emotional aspect, which is which is basically like when I spend money, am I grateful and intentional, or am I immediately contracting, panicking, second guessing myself, or using spending to change how I feel? So money management becomes like way much more easy when it's not just what did I spend, but what did I decide my resources were going to support? And that is another form of follow through. I made a conscious decision about what mattered. And when I let my money participate in that decision, it just makes things so much easier. So here's what I want you to do. Don't overhaul your entire life like this weekend and take one manifestation or one goal that matters to you and do a really simple TEM check-in. So time, energy, and money. And start with time and ask, where is my time actually going? What am I avoiding? And what deserves my time that isn't getting it? Then look at energy and ask, what consistently drains me? What gives me energy? And what emotional pattern keeps siphoning energy from this goal? And then look at money and ask, where is my money actually going? Does that match what I value? And what financial decision have I been avoiding? And you don't need to make like an elaborate spreadsheet unless you genuinely enjoy spreadsheets. You can just look at your calendar and your bank activity and how you actually felt throughout the last week. And you're essentially collecting evidence instead of relying on the story in your head about what you think you're doing. And then choose the one pillar creating the biggest restriction right now. Because fixing a money problem with another productivity system or fixing an energy problem by waking up an hour earlier usually just creates more frustration. So, and I want you to be compassionate, but extremely specific when you do this, because vague awareness doesn't create much change. So like, okay, for example, I waste too much time isn't necessarily as useful as I spent 45 minutes every day, every morning, like scrolling before I work on the thing I say matters. Or I'm exhausted isn't as useful as noticing, hey, like every time I talk to this person, I spend another 2 hours mentally replaying the conversation. Or instead of saying I'm bad with money, you can look into it and you can get like an insight, like a specific one, like I'm spending $300 a month on things I don't particularly value, while telling myself I can't afford the $200 thing that would actually support my goal, like a course. That's where you find the hidden pattern underneath the resource. So your calendar, energy, and spending aren't there to judge you. They're giving you clues about the systems and patterns currently running your life. And once you can see the pattern clearly, accountability becomes much easier because now you have something specific to follow through on. Then I would look for the old patterns across all three areas because this is where time, energy, and money patterns are clear. So for example, an old pattern could look something like this, like time. I give myself more time. Energy, I try harder. Money, I make quick money. And none of these things sound like a big deal on the surface, which is exactly why patterns like this can survive for so long. So like, for example, more time sounds responsible, trying harder sounds ambitious, and making money quickly can feel like you're getting ahead faster. But if more time turns into procrastination, or trying harder turns into depletion, and chasing quick money keeps pulling you towards short-term opportunities instead of building something sustainable, then the strategy that was supposed to move you forward can actually keep you cycling through the same pattern. So rather than asking, how can I get more time, push myself harder, or make money faster, Ask, what would a more conscious relationship with this resource look like now? And that's ultimately what I want you to take from this. You probably don't need to become an entirely different person to create the next version of your life. You probably already have these skills. You're probably resilient, you have ideas, experiences, and probably far more evidence of your ability to follow through than you give yourself credit for. But what the invitation is to look at whether your time, energy, and money are moving in the same direction as your intention. Because when those resources start agreeing with what you say you want, you stop fighting yourself. And accountability becomes less about forcing yourself into submission and more about repeatedly asking, does this decision support where I'm going? So some days the answer will be work. Some days it'll be rest. Some days it'll be spending. And sometimes it'll be saying no and keeping your time, energy, or money for something that matters more. So you don't need every decision to be perfect. You just need enough aligned decisions that your position in time and space begins to change. And eventually, you look around and realize the reality you kept trying to manifest isn't just something you're visualizing anymore. It's your life because of your choices that you have been quietly building. So thank you so much for watching. If you would like to work with me, check out the links in my YouTube homepage. Bye.